Anytime a news report says ADL shows trend, you can bet there's only one trend actually on display. Not just the trend, but the constant of blatant and ridiculous lies and distortions coming from that organization. And it's not surprising. If there's anybody who gets even more undeserved, uncritical media promotion than Joe Biden himself, it would be the ADL. But it's still important to examine and to challenge, because otherwise, these unexamined, unchallenged claims have a nasty habit of becoming true in public perception. Of course, as we've all been watching, the Buffalo shooting has to be maximized for political utility. It's a great opportunity to crack down on your speech rights. It's a great opportunity to crack down on your gun rights. And more broadly, it's a great opportunity for the ADL and their media allies to smear the politics of half or more of the country as a problem somehow implicated in this event. That's the headline level conclusion you're supposed to reach without reading any further. From the ADL, courtesy of New York Times promotion this week, the article published in the Times morning newsletter Tuesday titled simply, "The Rights Violence Problem." And that's right, this isn't actually a statistically rare event. The Buffalo shooting is actually something common. It's part of a pattern common to one particular political perspective, in fact. So even if you just vote for lower taxes and less regulation, understand you are still associated with the right. A uniquely violent perspective, because that's where most extremist violence in the US comes from, apparently. It's a claim that was then repeated across several other outlets and personalities. Hey, didn't you hear? Half the extremist murders in the country are by right-wing white supremacists. So get out of here with your both sides nonsense. Now, perhaps some counterexamples might come to mind, even if the Chiron did declare them mostly peaceful, and we'll get to those. But what's notable about this propaganda piece is, even if it's true as presented, it is still a statistical anomaly. It's incredibly rare, not incredibly common. That's the reason this information is often presented only in terms of percentages. It conceals scale. From the top of that New York Times piece, oh wow, look at that big giant 55% white supremacy bar. See how massive it is compared to the tiny little left-wing bar? Wow, this is a huge and disproportionate problem. But 55% of 10 cases would still be a near-never event, so what are we talking about? What's the actual scale here? And to be fair, the New York Times does give that number. The ADL has counted 450 extremist murders over the last decade. And if you add up the white supremacists and the anti-government people and other right-wing views generally, 75% of these 450 total extremist murders are from right-wing ideologues. So this story is actually talking about 338 or so killings. But there's still no perspective offered for the scale of this supposed problem. Every murder is wrong, of course, and should be brought to justice, but 338 murders over 10 years? That's a very small number when considered in proper proportion. For comparison, since bar charts are so popular to show massive differences in this claim, here's another bar chart for your consideration. On the left is a bar so small in scale, it doesn't even show up. That is the 338 murders the New York Times and the ADL are warning you is such a serious problem. They counted those murders in the decade from 2012 to 2021. And on the right is the total murders in the United States from 2010 to 2019, the most recent complete decade of FBI crime data. It's not a perfect overlap time-wise, but it is roughly equivalent. There were about 156,000 murders in the country during that time frame. If we switch to a pie chart presentation, we can at least see the sliver to visualize the proportion. The right-wing extremist murders the Times and the ADL are warning about represent about 0.2% of the country's total murders for the decade. So even if we take the ADL's data as true, which, as we'll get to, we should not do that, they're accounting for only about 1 of every 500 murders that happens, and insisting that you focus on that one as some sort of uniquely dangerous problem. But it isn't. It's a minute fraction of a much larger problem overall. And on the scale of that problem, let's put the numbers into additional relevant perspective. The ADL and the New York Times emphasize 338 murders over a decade as a stat to be concerned with, but that's a number lower than only 1 year's worth of murders in many major cities. New York, Chicago, Houston, all have annual murder numbers exceeding the decade's worth nationally that the ADL is highlighting. In Chicago in 2020, there were over twice as many murders in 1 year, 727, as the entire decade's collection of right-wing extremist murders from the ADL nationally. In other words, murder in Chicago alone is over 21 times more frequent than the right-wing extremist murder that the ADL is warning about nationally. If you control for population, the numbers aren't even comparable. The per capita murder rate in Chicago is almost 3,000 times the ADL's national right-wing extremist murder rate, but we're supposed to believe the true threat to minority security is the guy who votes Republican. So even if we accept these numbers as true, we're talking about a statistical blip, not a statistical trend. It's like looking at a shark tank and focusing on one piranha over in the corner. But as we should all know and understand by now, when you hear a claim from the ADL, you don't take it as true. These extremist murders that they're talking about are anomalies, but honesty from the ADL is an even rarer one. As you might expect, definitions are key in this analysis. What counts as a right-wing murder motive for the ADL's analysis? And what counts as an ideologically motivated murder in general? The ADL is not transparent or specific with its definitions or its methods. What counts as an extremist, as far as I can tell in their description, is a purely subjective judgment. All the ADL mentions is police or media classification, but of course, that varies by police department or media outlet. The ADL offers no definition for who is an extremist of any ideology and who isn't. And as far as what counts as an extremist murder in this analysis, well, that's where it gets completely dishonest. The ADL is counting not murders motivated by ideology, but murders associated with ideology. You'll notice a tiny font footnote on many of the graphics circulated. These numbers include both ideologically and non-ideologically motivated killings. So what the hell does that mean? Well, it means if you simply have beliefs that the ADL doesn't like, if you have spicy opinions and then later commit a murder for completely unrelated reasons, the ADL is counting that. But that's not how the information was presented by the New York Times. The headline says, events like Buffalo are common, part of a pattern, ideologically motivated murder, not ideologically associated murder. So what are we actually talking about here? Well, what we're talking about is a whole bunch of nonsense that is in fact nothing like Buffalo. The ADL report that the New York Times is talking about is the most recent 2021 report. They do this annually. And the report only details 2021 incidents, but several of them are cases of domestic violence, as in an alleged white supremacist or anti-government extremist or other type of right-winger kills his wife or other family member without any indication of ideological motive. Indeed, such motive would make no sense in this context. If these guys believe in racial exclusion, I'm guessing they're not including those races in their families in the first place. Several other cases involve white supremacist prison gangs, some of them violence between the gang themselves. Again, not exactly similar to Buffalo as claimed. In several cases, the ADL acknowledges there's just no motive even known. It's just a crime was committed by someone the ADL thinks had offensive views otherwise, but no evidence that those views had any relationship to the crime. The ADL's description of their own research and analysis makes a stunning and, I would say, fatal admission if you actually bother to read through it. Of the quote-unquote white supremacist murders the ADL has collected, again, that's the big 55% bar on the New York Times graphic. Only about a third could even be assigned an ideological motive. Most were group-related, says the ADL, but not ideological attacks. They were related to traditional criminal activities like drug deals, home invasions, or robberies. In most of these cases, by the ADL's admission, there was no clear motive that could be determined. We were told by the Times headline that clear motives present a clear problem, but when you read the ADL's own fine print, they admit themselves the problem isn't clear and the motive often isn't even present at all. But just in case we had any lingering faith in methodological integrity, just in case we think the ADL might be trying to do an honest job, gathering information that isn't always clear, connecting a few dots here and there that aren't always explicit. No, they are not doing that. Not only are they counting things that clearly should not be counted, they are also ignoring things that are clearly and explicitly the exact sort of ideologically motivated violence they claim to be analyzing. You might be wondering, hey, where's the Black Lives Matter and Antifa body count? Well, the bulk of that was in 2020, not included in this 2021 report that the Times is citing. But if you go look at the 2020 report, you'll notice a lot of that is excluded. The ADL did actually include the Portland Antifa murderer Michael Reinell, but as far as the rest of the Summer of Love, it is largely excluded. No mention of the charred body in the Minneapolis George Floyd ashes. No mention of David Dorn. No mention of the Chaz murders. No mention of almost all of the 24+ killings that happened as a result of left-wing political rioting throughout that year. And in 2021, there's an even more glaring omission: the great bumper car accident of Waukesha. As you may recall, Darrell Brooks killed 6 and injured 62 when his SUV took control of him and committed the great car attack last Thanksgiving. His social media posts prior included advocacy of violence against white people, and he unironically made pro-Hitler posts against Jews. Motive unknown, apparently, but even if these posts are unrelated to the actual attack, by the ADL's own methodology, counting these incidents is not by strict, direct extremist motive. It's by extremist associations. How exactly can they look at Brooks' history and conclude no extremist beliefs or associations? They don't even bother to tell you. Search the report for Waukesha. Nothing. Search the report for Darrell Brooks. Nothing. Search the report for SUV of Peace. Nothing. The ADL does offer a few paragraphs of discussion about some incidents people might think should be included based on speculation about extremist connections. And this is where you would put the explanation for Waukesha exclusion if you had any honesty. Give your definitional and methodological reasons why Waukesha doesn't fit into this report's constraints, but they don't even mention it there. Instead, they discuss why Brian Sicknick of the Capitol Police isn't included. Of course, Sicknick was the officer who died January 7th. It was originally and wrongly reported he was murdered by mob fire extinguisher bludgeoning. He was not. He died of a stroke the day after January 6th. The DC medical examiner concluded of natural causes, not murder. Why was Brian Sicknick excluded? Because there's no evidence he was murdered, let alone ideologically murdered. That's a one-sentence explanation, not multiple paragraphs. Meanwhile, why was Darrell Brooks excluded is a no-paragraphs explanation, despite both factors obviously present, not just murder, but mass murder with clear ideological priors. And no mention from the Times, of course, of all of these omissions and limitations, of which even the ADL itself acknowledges at least a few in its report. The Times is so uncritical, they don't think even the ADL's own self-criticism is worthy of a mention, which tells you a lot. The Times didn't have to do original work to find holes in this analysis. The flaws and limitations are all right there in the fine print. They just redacted them in their presentation to you. I can't call it laziness when the work is already done and disregarded anyway. That's necessarily something more malicious. And speaking of the work, we should continue to do that. Keep reading, keep challenging, keep debunking. Keeping the critical thought skills sharp is always important, but at this point, I'm ready to beat them at their own game, too. Try fighting a little fire with fire. It's time to put together a very official-looking report that shows exactly how the ADL is responsible for 75% of the country's made-up bullshit. Is it true? Who knows? It's got to be at least as true as this report, and besides, it all just depends on how you define the term bullshit, so you can't really go wrong. Because after all, the sliver of things the ADL says that aren't might be even tinier than the ADL's sliver of extremism that's generating all this attention in the first place. Statistical accuracy and comprehensiveness are not the name of this game anyway. Their rules, not ours. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.